All right, everyone, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. So thanks all for coming to our talk today. We're talking about time and why managing dates and times in Drupal has never been easier. Already got the red button pressed. So for anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Anderson-Clutz. I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer at Acquia. I'm also on the Talking Drupal podcast. I was also named track lead for the events recipe as part of Drupal Starshot, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And if you wanted to contact me on all of the Drupal and social platforms, you can find me as Man Clue. So, managing dates and times, especially in online applications, is sort of notoriously finicky, especially when you start to think about things like time zones, recurring dates, a variety of other use cases where times and dates get thorny. And some of the technologies that we tend to rely on are sort of notoriously bad about being helpful, in quotation marks. So fortunately, Drupal can make this easy, right? One of the things that's amazing about Drupal is that we have this huge ecosystem of modules that we can rely on. So Smart Date is a module that I started working on specifically to make it easier to manage dates and times in Drupal. And it has a submodule for managing recurring dates. There's a companion to that, the Date Augmenter API, is a way to sort of like add additional capabilities. An example of that is the Add to Calendar Date Augmenter. You might use the full calendar module to have an interactive calendar display, registration to provide a way for people to sign up for events. And then you might associate, locations, and then there's a variety of modules for those. And then, to have different sort of capabilities associated with those to make it easy for people to add new content, to make sure that you're getting good, SEO URLs and a variety of others. So is that easy? I mean, look at all the modules that we're talking about implementing to be able to get all of that put together. So fortunately, in modern Drupal, we have this idea of recipes. So show of hands, who here is familiar with recipes? A couple of hands, okay. So recipes are really meant to be kind of a successor to distributions. So distributions have been a powerful way for Drupal sites to be able to sort of adopt a robust set of capabilities, but they tend to kind of lock you into specific approaches. And then if further down the line you decide that wasn't necessarily the best way to solve a particular problem, you don't really have much of a choice. You're kind of locked in. So the idea of recipes is that they're more granular. They're in fact composable, so you can sort of piece together different recipes that solve the problems that you're looking to solve. And most particularly, they don't lock you in. So you can apply a recipe to your site, get the capabilities that it provides, and then if you don't like it, you can just rip out the parts that it added to your site. So today we're actually going to do a live demo, and we're going to use these different recipes. Primary one being the events recipe that creates an event content type and then a view to display them. Events calendar adds an interactive calendar display. Events locations is going to rely on the locations recipe, which defines a location content type and then adds an association to your event. And events registration as a way to have easy sign up. And then events recurring just modifies the event content type to allow for recurring dates. So we're going to do all of this on sort of a fresh install of Drupal 11. So there's a couple of things in here that are sort of like not standard out of the box Drupal 11. So, Gin and its toolbar. And then a couple of modules that I just find make it easier to manage Drupal via keyboard. So with that, we're going to go into a hands-on demo. And if we go to our demo site, let's go here. So we can see this is a fresh install of Drupal 11. If I go up to say create content, I've only got article and basic page. And so now let's go ahead and apply a recipe. So if we go dev drush, modern versions of drush have this recipe command, so you can just tell it where the recipe is that you want to apply. Let's say apply the events recipe. It's going ahead, installing modules, importing configuration, doing a bunch of things that if you were to sort of add these modules by hand, do all the configuration, you certainly could. You'd end up with the same result. but it might take you a couple of hours if you knew what you were doing, whereas now we get all of this out of the box. Now today with recipes, I would usually advise, particularly with the ones we're going to see today, clearing the cache afterwards. And now when we go back to our demo site and refresh the page, you're going to see that we have this new events area. And when we go in here, you can see we've got tabs for upcoming and past events. We can go ahead, follow the prompt to add an event. So let's just call this our test event. Maybe set that sometime in the future. And save that. And now we can see that that's there. If we click into it, we can see we've got sort of add calendar links that are SVGs, automatically styled to match sort of link colors, all of those good things. But if we go back here, notice we still have those two tabs. Let's go ahead and add another recipe. In this case, let's go calendar. Now, the events calendar recipe actually requires the events recipe. So there's this concept in recipes of item potency. So it's the idea that you can apply the same recipe again and again to your site, and it should be able to do that without errors. And so it actually reapplied the events recipe when I applied this events calendar. And then let's also put our cache again. When we go back here now, notice that now we have this calendar tab. And here's our calendar. We can drag and drop our event and it saved that change. We can go into the date and time, change when in the day it is, or we can even drag and drop to change the duration of the event. So, and then just to sort of validate, when we go back here, we can see that all of those changes were saved to the database, not just part of the widget. So that's pretty handy. Let's go ahead and apply another recipe. So let's say events. Let's go events locations. And now it's going ahead, it's reapplying the events recipe, it's applying the locations recipe, and then the events locations recipe that connects the two. We'll clear our cache again. And now if we go back into here, actually let's go back one step. If I refresh the page, notice now we have this location section. It's creating a map, but there's no data yet, so we can say, let's give it the Acme headquarters. Get that data and save it. And notice out of the box, without having to put in any API keys, it's using, must be something with Wi-Fi. Normally it would give us a map because it's actually done the geocoding in real time, but it's a live demo, so it's exciting. Now if we go back to our events, go into our test event, edit that. Notice now we have a field where we can say, where's that going to happen? Acme Boston. Save that, and now it's basically pulling in a teaser of that. So, if you wanted to have it show a map here, that's very easy to change. You can fully customize that however you need to. So that is one of the beauty of everything that we're seeing, is that it's giving you a useful starting point, and then you can sort of tweak and customize that to meet more specific use cases if you need to. All right, let's go ahead here and do another one. So that's registration. And clear the cache. And now if we go back into edit our event, at the very bottom we'll see there's a new field here for registration type. So it actually changes the default, so all new content will automatically have it set to use this new sign up registration type. Again, you can define different registration types that capture different information. So maybe you have some registrations where you need to capture things like t-shirt sizes, or other ones where you need to capture things like food allergies. You can have sort of both of those flows defined so that you can capture for each event the type of information that's most relevant. This is all permission-based as well. I think for a standard user, you probably just see the one option to sign up for yourself. There's probably still some UX things to be sort of improved on for this registration one, but it's pretty simple out of the box, I would say, in general. And then the last one we're going to do is events recurring, because we want to be able to manage recurring dates. That cache clear as well. And then let's go back into create a new event. Let's just call this our recurring event. We'll backdate this a little bit and say it's going to reoccur weekly and end after 5 times. Save that. And now you can see that it's actually using sort of a specialized formatter for displaying upcoming and past events. And if we go back into our calendar view, you can see that those are all displaying on our calendar as well. So there's a lot of capability that we've been able to put together really in just a few minutes. You know, if you think back to that slide with all the different modules listed there, those are all installed here, those are all configured. So it really gives you a very robust way to sort of start with your events system, but then you can, again, you still have the flexibility to fully customize it. If there are parts of it you realize, maybe I don't really like that registration piece, we're going to switch to Meetup or something like that. You know, you're not locked in at all. All right, so let's go back into our slides. So let's talk a little bit more about those recipes. So the events recipe, again, uses smart date to give you a field for capturing when your event is going to happen. It automatically generates those add calendar links, has a view for upcoming and past events, and it's pretty stable, I would say, at this point. It's actually in Star Trek that we're going to talk about later, but there's probably still a few UX tweaks that we're going to work on over time. There are recipes for locations and the event's location recipe that connects it to your event. It's going to set up automatically the address and geo field, fields for being able to both capture the address and then turn that into sort of coordinates. It's using the nominatum service, which is provided by sort of the OpenStreetMaps group as a free geocoding service that usually works out of the box. And that's actually the part in our demo that went a little bit off the rails, so you know your mileage may vary. It's using Leaflet as a free extensible mapping solution, and then it gets added to the event content type as this where field. Events calendar is sort of that interactive calendar that we saw. Uses a refreshed version of the full calendar module that was really popular in Drupal 7 and then sort of fell out of use. Uses the full calendar library in the most recent version of that. And it's what provides that ability to have the drag and drop rescheduling events. You can also double click on an empty space and create a new event. There's ongoing work in terms of things like performance improvements, so potentially loading data via Ajax, as well as some options around displaying the detailed content as tooltips. The events registration that we saw is actually using the event or entity registration module, creates those sort of fieldable entities, and then you can select on any particular entity, any particular event, which sort of registration flow that you want to use. And then the last one is events recurring, so it's the newest of those events recipes. It goes through these specific steps. Again, if you knew what you were doing, you could make these changes by hand, probably in just a few minutes. But the challenge is that not everyone knows exactly what changes need to be made, and so applying this one recipe gets you set up for recurring events. The one thing to be aware of is that for versions of Drupal prior to 10.4 or 11.1, applying this recipe will sort of break that idea of item potency. So having used this recipe to update your event, and then if you ever have to reapply your events recipe, it will not be happy with you. So there is a 1.1 version of the events recipe that works well with this. That requires sort of Drupal 11.1 or Drupal 10.4. But using that combination is, I would say, what's recommended if recurring events are something that you want to set up through recipes. Now, there's also something that we call the event platform. And, that is, let me see if I can switch back. There we go. So the event platform is really a way for Drupal camps, so events like this one, to be able to easily set up a website for managing things like user-provided sessions, being able to schedule those. Essentially, it sets up a variety of different content types for you, and then has interactive elements like a tool that will bulk generate your time slots. It has sort of a drag and drop tool for scheduling your sessions. It has automatic notifications, so when a session is first submitted and then later accepted or rejected, it'll set all of those things up. So again, that's for a different kind of use case for managing events, a very powerful way to get started. There's actually some planning underway to convert what's currently sort of a collection of modules into a set of recipes. And then the other thing that some folks may have heard about is something called Drupal Starshot. So when we think about Drupal as a project, traditionally, the core maintainers are focused on sort of core itself, which is sort of very stable, thoroughly tested, but sort of limited in capability by design, and then also a little on sort of the slow to innovate side. So it tends to be very measured in terms of making drastic changes. Live websites, on the other hand, use dozens, sometimes hundreds of modules to provide very common capabilities. And so the idea of Starshot is, what if we could provide an experience that's really sort of between those? And that's really what Starshot is designed to do. So out of the box, it's meant to provide a sort of richer experience for people who might be trying to compare Drupal as a platform with something like not only WordPress, but maybe even like Wix or Squarespace. And so having a richer set of features, some of which rely on contrib projects, is really sort of the idea behind Starshot. So you can think of Starshot as really Drupal core with automatic updates built in, having a project browser as kind of a visual interface to be able to add additional capabilities, recipes as that ability to sort of quickly add sets of configuration to solve common use cases, and then Experience Builder is sort of a visual interface, kind of a next generation page layout construction builder, but also has the ability to sort of completely theme your website directly within the browser. So everybody familiar with Starshot? Show of hands, seen a couple. Actually was an RC1 release of Starshot just this week, so definite progress there. And then January 15th is the official launch date for Starshot, and it sounds like there's already some work around having a party here in Toronto, so hopefully you can join us for some of the celebrations there. So that's really my presentation. There is a QR code for the slides, and then I also have Smart Date stickers if anybody wants stickers, because, devs love stickers.
Thank you, Martin. I was wondering, for basic samples, it's okay, but how about we have many events, enormous amount of events? How do we manage either the queries or the database, and also all the caching, because maybe these events are changing or they are changing the location. So how do we manage this larger scale?
So I would say it's the part where I think events actually deviate the most from sort of standard content management is probably more on the recurring event side of things. But in some ways, particularly the way Smart Date tries to manage recurring events is more like stored at least as kind of like a multi-valued standard date field. So it tries to make it so the queries end up being basically equivalent to sort of a standard view that Drupal would generate. But there are some things around sort of invalidating caches so that things are displaying more based on the current time as well as sort of the next event types of things. So the formatter that we saw tries to do a little bit of that. It sets a cache invalidation of when the next iteration of that is, so that if you go back after the next event in that recurring event, you should see it updated to reflect that. But it's definitely a tricky question for sure. one of the things that's fun to manage with dates and times in general. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks for the awesome talk. So I haven't implemented any calendar stuff for a long time. Most of the stuff I'm doing is decoupled and stuff. But what I've seen now from you with the calendar, that's incredible. The drag and drop. So is this just Contrib drag and drop calendar, like events calendar module?
So so the events calendar recipe basically, so it installs the full calendar module, and then it imports a view that has it already connected to sort of show everything, as we saw. So, and I think to some degree, like there isn't a lot that it really changes from sort of if you were to install full calendar and just create a new view by yourself. But it does, do a few things like, setting up specifying the right field and a couple of other things. So it's largely out of the box. Some of the interactive pieces are really more like of the module, whereas the actual display really relies pretty heavily on the full calendar library. So there are, it's sort of a combination of those two things.
Oh, I see. So one final question. I'm not quite sure how well and how much we can work with the Google Calendar API, but technically we could connect it to the system, basically pull right into Drupal and start managing now Google Calendar into Drupal and manage it from Drupal.
So the full calendar module does have code to be able to pull in data from Google Calendar. At this point, I don't think it works both ways, but if that's something you really need, then by all means open an issue and let's chat about what you want. I did have an interesting discussion with someone not too long ago about having Drupal managed data exposed as like a calendar that could be pulled into like a Google Calendar or some other kind of a calendar system, so that it becomes more of a live connection as opposed to like, if you use the links today, it sort of like either downloads an ICS file or like pulls the data into your Google Calendar, sort of a one-off, but having more of a live connection, I think is a pretty logical next step.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Question about recipes, because I saw you put some Rush command to call them up. So in our team, we don't have access to Rush commands. I just wonder if, because we're on the front end mostly, but I just wonder if there's like a UI solution for recipes in the native Drupal, not in the snapshot.
So the answer is yes. Or at least there's a notion of an interface. So there is something called Project Browser, and I think actually if we go back here, so Project Browser is definitely something in Starshot that's designed to be almost like an App Store experience within Drupal. Notionally, that's where you will find recipes and apply them to your site. It, behind the scenes, should be able to do all of the composery things, so that as a site builder or a front-end developer, you don't have to sort of go on the command line and use Drush. But today, it doesn't actually work with recipes yet. So within Starshot, they've actually sort of hard-coded something so that the recipes that are included within Starshot, you can actually find in the project browser and apply those to your Starshot site. And then I think there's about, I want to say 5 or 6 recipes, including the events recipe, within Starshot that you can sort of, if you're starting a site with Starshot or Drupal CMS, as if they're calling it, you can use those today. So the answer is Project Browser, but to be able to use it for any recipe, that's sort of work that still has to be done. I think we're holding people up from getting set up, so maybe we'll just make this the last question.
One more, I have a question.
Okay.
What's the difference between recipe and the current Drupal config, CIM, like config import?
So I'd say the big difference is this new system that we have for config actions. So previously, you could even create a module that would import a set of configuration. And as long as you could be very literal about the changes that you wanted to make, that worked perfectly well. I had a bunch of modules that actually did that. But the problem is, suppose you want to place a block on the top of your homepage. To be able to do that with standard configuration, you have to know the machine name of your theme to be able to have the configuration actually put it in the theme of your homepage. You would have to know what numerical weight to give it so that it would appear at the top. Whereas with config actions, there's actually config action that says, place block on default theme, and then you can say, place it at the top, and then it'll do all of the work behind the scenes for you. And so as a recipe author, you can say, this should always be, in the default theme, on the home page at the top, and it does sort of, that more complex work for you.
Thank you very much, Margie.
All right. Excellent.